This is Duke University.
For moving forward, so it should be the perfect summation to what you've already heard today. Our moderator is Ryke, who is the director of the Duke Environmental Law and Policy Clinic here at Duke, and he wanted me to keep it short because he's got some new form of an interesting introduction for everyone. So stay tuned for that. And after the panel, there will be cake and coffee over in 3171. So please join us for the reception that should be pretty brief after this is all over. So just head on over there when the fourth panel is concluded.
Thanks for your attention. This panel is going to be, I think, quite an interesting way to wrap up and sum up all the things that we've been talking about today. We have panelists here representing a variety of disciplines and approaches and a variety of scales of working on these problems, and I'm very excited to introduce them. In terms of original introduction, sometimes within my environmental law and policy class, in order to help break down some of the things that separate us, we try and find what are some of the common human elements. So I'm going to ask each one of the panelists to identify where they went to elementary school. When they get up, they're just going to each identify that. I went to C.W. Dobbins Elementary School in the thriving metropolis of Wallace, North Carolina. I'm sure have never been there, but if you have, you just breezed by it on the interstate because it's completely bypassed on all sides, like we heard about earlier today when Chandra was talking about the bypassing of eastern North Carolina. That's exactly the story in my hometown. The first speaker to my left is Kate Gordon. Kate is the Vice President for Energy Policy at the Center for American Progress. And Kate will be authoring an article for the upcoming issue of this journal. And then next to her is Maria Savasta-Kennedy. She's the faculty advisor for UNC's Environmental Law Project, and she's a clinical professor of law at UNC School of Law. She used to work for Earth Justice and has been an active environmental law litigator. And also, I'm very proud that she's the faculty advisor to my old organization, the Environmental Law Project. And just to her left is Savi Horne. She is the executive director of the North Carolina Association of Black Lawyers Land Loss Prevention Project. Savi also serves on the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency's National Environmental Justice Advisory Council. This is a body and a project at EPA that's been very active in the last 2 years, I'm proud to say, after so many years of laboring in obscurity. We really see things are really coming to the forefront there. So we're going to start by letting Kate give a presentation, and then Maria will finish up with Savi. They're each going to give brief presentations, and we want to leave plenty of time for y'all's questions. So without further ado, please give a hand for Kate Gordon.
All right, so where did I go to elementary school? I went to elementary school in 2 different places. I went to Marquette Elementary School in Madison, Wisconsin, and where I grew up on the east side near the Oscar Mayer factory, for any of you who know Madison. And I also went to elementary school at the Lucille M. Nixon School in Palo Alto, California. And my parents were divorced, and they lived in 2 different states, and we moved every semester. So just think about that for a minute. But it's kind of an apropos question, because one of the reasons I'm interested in what I'm going to be talking about right now is because of that divide. So again, I'm Kate Gordon. I run the Energy and Environment Program at the Center for American Progress. We are a think tank in Washington, D.C. that was started by John Podesta, who was Clinton's chief of staff. And we have sort of an interesting model. We do a lot of communications as well as policy work. We put half of our funding directly into communications. So we're kind of a new model of think tank that John kind of came up with when he started in 2003, really with the goal of not kind of putting reports on a shelf, but talking about issues that are very central to politics and policy and people's lives and trying to get them out there into the conversation. So it's been an honor to be there, and it's great to be here, and thanks especially to John and Morgan for all your work on this. I used to run a law journal, and I know how hard this is. So a lot of the earlier panelists who have been great have really focused on the critical issue of the impacts of fossil fuels and of the existing energy economy on communities, and particularly low-income communities, which I think is just one of the most critical reasons why we need a transformation to a green energy economy. I'm going to talk a little bit more about how we do the transformation to the green energy economy, because that's mostly what I work on. I'm an economic development person. I went to law and planning school at Berkeley. and I do mostly green jobs type of work, and thinking about how to do economic development to create a greener economy. And in particular, I'm going to focus on what my paper is about for the forum, which is about the mismatches in our current education and workforce system and the needs of the green economy, and how we're going to have to address those in order to actually get people trained, especially people in low and middle skill, who are currently sort of have low and middle skill jobs or are not, your sort of knowledge workers, how we're going to get people trained to have good jobs in the green economy. So let me talk for a second about green jobs, because we actually haven't amazingly had the whole what is a green job conversation yet in this conference. And I'm not really going to go there, because I think it's sort of self-defeating to have that conversation. But I will say, because it's so broad, I mean, I will say that one of the things, interestingly, having been there at the forefront of the green jobs movement, when we started the Apollo Alliance, which is where I was before CAP, we really tried to talk about this as very holistic. We tried to say, energy is about generation, production. It's how we generate energy, use energy. Businesses have energy as a big sunk cost. It's everything we do, and it should be part of everything we do. And then it kind of got sliced and diced, and then people started talking about green jobs like, how many jobs will you create if you spend X amount of money on this policy proposal? And we started going in that direction, and I actually think that that's narrowed the conversation to the point where it's gotten very politicized and it's gotten very hard to defend. So we're trying to expand that out again and really talk about a green economy, a sustainable economy. There's still a couple different ways of people talking about that, and I wanted to give you two kind of different ways people talk about the green economy. Internationally, you won't be surprised to hear this, think tanks are much broader and much more interested in the sustainability and the equity aspects of the green economy. So the International Labor Organization gives us this definition. In its simplest expression, a green economy is low carbon, resource efficient, and socially inclusive. It is a green economy. Growth in income and employment should be driven by public and private investments that reduce carbon emissions and pollution, enhance energy and resource efficiency, and prevent the loss of biodiversity and ecosystem services. So you hear that's a very inclusive, broad, so it's about social justice, it's about ecosystems, but it's also about investment. The Brookings Institution has written the most comprehensive green jobs study recently in the United States called Sizing the Green Economy. If you haven't read it, I recommend it. It's pretty interesting. And it has this definition, which is much more the way we talk about it here in the States. The green economy is economic activity measured in terms of establishments and the jobs associated with them that produces goods and services with an environmental benefit or adds value to such products using skills or technologies that are uniquely applied to those products. Much more of an economic definition, much less about sustainability, but still useful. So that's kind of where we are. We have the very broad international context, a little bit more of a narrower economic focus here in the United States. Either one of those, I think they're both good, and we should be thinking about these things in both terms. But instead of having a fight about what the green economy is, I think what we should talk about really is, what do we know about it, whichever definition you use. And here's some things we know about it. We know it's growing worldwide. So the US is actually the largest global clean tech investor right now. We just passed China in 2011, which is a big deal. Investor in clean energy technology worldwide. A quarter of all venture capital investments in the United States are into clean technology companies. There are 29 states with renewable energy standards. There are building codes across states. The Recovery Act is the single largest ever clean energy investment program. So we have actually seen a lot of growth in the United States, despite what you hear. We also know that the green economy creates, and this is relevant to this conversation, a big range of occupations for a big range of skill levels. So when you're talking about energy, you're talking about generation of energy, production, manufacturing, operation and installation. You're talking about sales. You're talking about transportation. It's a huge amount of occupations, and it's very labor intensive and very capital intensive. That is different than a lot of the other things we look at for economic development. So the high-tech industry in the United States tends to create a lot of knowledge industry jobs, or a few, actually, not a lot. A few knowledge industry jobs, a ton of jobs overseas in production, and then a lot of sales jobs back in the United States. Knowledge industry, high skill, high wage. Sales, low wage. Not a lot in the middle. Biotech tends to create a lot of knowledge, or a few knowledge industry jobs, some sales jobs, and some production jobs, but a lot of overseas jobs as well. Green economy, 26% of the jobs are in manufacturing. Another more than 20% are probably in construction, depending on which sector of the economy you're looking at. It's a large amount of middle skill jobs, middle class jobs that make have a decent wage for people without a 4-year college degree. And that's critical because only 30% of the entire US workforce has a 4-year college degree. 70% of our workforce does not. So solutions that only speak to that knowledge industry are not solutions for 70% of our workforce. So we have a big mismatch there between what we need for the green economy and what we have. We anticipate the economy will grow by, altogether by about 14 million jobs, Georgetown does, between 2008 and 2018. Most of those industries will require some kind of post-secondary degree. So that's a technical degree or an associate's degree or a 4-year degree. But again, 70% of the workforce lacks that. The utility sector is a great example of this mismatch. Utility sector, 40% of the people who work in the utility sector, which will drive the green economy, whichever direction we go, 40% of the folks in that industry will retire in the next 10 years. And the utility sector cannot currently replace them because they do not have the ability to find workers that have the science and technical education that they need and the specific skills that they need for those jobs, those middle skill jobs. So why is this? And I'm going to go a little over my time. I'm sorry. Why is this? There's two big reasons why this mismatch has happened. One is that our education system, the K through 12 education system, has increasingly gone in the direction of training people for 4-year college degrees and of moving away from technical education and vocational education. There's a lot of reasons for that. Some of them are very good reasons. It has traditionally been a place where people have been tracked, often according to their race or socioeconomic status, into technical jobs. But the loss of that has been hugely significant to the economy because essentially, if you're someone whose skills in high school, for instance, are in technical education, if your skills are more hands-on and applied, what are your options? A, there's a lot of dropouts because people don't feel like they have hands-on education. And B, you leave school without that technical education and you basically go into a low-wage retail job because that's what's available. So the loss of technical ed is a big thing. The second big reason is that the workforce development system is really not designed for this problem. 2 to 4 year colleges are designed for full-time students who are in school all the time. They are not designed for people who are working. They're not designed for flexibility. They're not designed for working learners or adults who have to work their way through college. We also have a workforce, the WEA system, the Workforce Act system, is very much about crisis management. So it's like you don't have a job, you're on public assistance, you need to get a job, you need to get the first job available. What is it? It's probably a low-paid retail job or a health services job. So when the system doesn't match the need, especially in the clean economy, and that's what the paper's about, so I won't go into too much detail about it, what it says, because you can read it. But basically what we recommend in the paper is a couple things. First of all, we recommend that community college and industries that the federal system help community colleges and industries form partnerships at the local level so that industry can really say, these are the jobs we're creating and what we need in this community, and the workforce system can actually train to those jobs. Especially after listening this morning, but in general, it's incredibly important that community be at the table in those conversations as well, so that it's an industry and workforce and community conversation. And the president talked about those partnerships in his State of the Union speech, so that's actually an encouraging sign. The second thing that we talk about is redirecting some of the federal money from the Perkins Loan Program, which is the single biggest technical program, education program at the federal level, to those kinds of partnerships, because they're much better at providing actual jobs for, actual training for actual jobs than the current system. But then the final part of the paper is that none of this matters at all unless we scale up the green economy. So all of this is training people for jobs that don't exist, unless we as a country make a serious commitment to this transition to a clean energy economy. We have not made that commitment. Other countries have made that commitment in a serious way and have married their workforce systems to their energy programs. We haven't made that a commitment. I think you all know that, but we haven't passed cap and trade. We haven't gotten into an international climate system. We have not passed a clean energy standard. We are letting the Recovery Act programs run down. We have not done that. We have not made that commitment. So failing to act in this case is really going backward. And I think you've heard today that we're essentially not just talking about our economy, we're talking about two paths or two futures, visions of the future here. There's this sort of extract and export and continue to have 5 companies own everything vision. And then there's the distributed generation, low carbon, more jobs for more people, green economy vision. And we so far as a country at the federal level have not made the commitment to go on that path. So I'll just end by saying one of the inspiring things for me and why I get out of Washington as much as I can is that at the local level, as you've heard, we are trying to get on that path. People are trying to move in the right direction, and it's going to take that kind of bottom-up action and that bottom-up pressure on people in Washington to make this happen, because I personally do not think we'll see leadership in Washington on this for at least the next couple of years. So thank you guys for all you're doing, and I will stop there.
You're on.
Okay, I'm on. Hey, I'm Savasta-Kennedy from just down the road at UNC School of Law. I went to Clifford School Elementary, which is located in Redwood City, California. I was born at Sequoia Hospital in Redwood City, California, so I guess I was destined to do something with environmental work. All right, so we've been talking today about the fact that poor communities and communities of color disproportionately bear the burdens of pollution. And I just want to extend that a little bit to think about the ways in which climate change is going to disproportionately affect vulnerable communities, both domestically here in the U.S. and globally. It's going to magnify damage in already vulnerable communities that are the least positioned to deal with the changes. So, for example, food security. As any farmer knows, weather drives the crops. And as we see major shifts in warming and floods and so on, it's going to really affect the food supply. So we're going to see some food shortages. A recent Oxfam report predicts that by 2050, climate change will consign an additional 11 million children to hunger. Water, flooding and drought conditions are going to create a further decline in clean drinking water all across the globe. Health crisis, like the damage arising from reduced water and food supplies, there's going to be a disproportionate impact on vulnerable populations, including malnutrition and the diseases arising from that, and also shifting weather conditions. Displacement and forced migration. By 2050, an estimated 200 million people may be on the move across the globe as climate refugees. So climate change impacts on vulnerable populations highlight the urgency, the need to do something to mitigate global warming and stop some of the effects, or at least try to mitigate them. However, what I want to talk about briefly and what I'm writing about is the tension between doing something and doing it right. So in our attempts to get out of the fossil fuel economy and come up with alternatives to the economy, we need to not have a tunnel vision about the co-harms and potential co-benefits of the solutions that we're looking at. For example, if we are incentivizing corn-based biofuels, we need to take into consideration the fact that corn-based biofuels use a tremendous amount of water and shrink available clean water supplies. There are land use issues, pesticide issues, impacts on world corn markets that you could see happening that impact vulnerable populations. We talked a little bit about fracking, the enormous amount of water that is needed to inject into those wells and bring out the supplies and the pollution that goes along with that. Carolyn talked a little bit in California about cap and trade and the idea that if you have a facility that needs to reduce its pollutants, it can choose not to do so on site, but simply sell an allowance or maybe buy an offset. So an offset is essentially saying, hey, I'm not going to reduce pollution at my source. I'm going to pay you to reduce it somewhere else. And that means that, as Carolyn pointed out, the people who are living near the site are still suffering the secondary effects of the pollution that's happening on the sites. And you see different sort of egregious examples of this in the world offset market, where you have the Bikram Dam in Malaysia that was built using through offset money, that submerged several hundred square miles of land and forced the relocation of thousands of indigenous people. And then, you have all this vegetation rotting under the water, and it's releasing methane. So in the end, you have a net gain of GHGs. So these solutions, again, that are, okay, this could be, we got to do something, but again, we have to do it right. And one more example that I think is interesting, the Grangemouth refinery in Scotland purchases carbon offsets from a eucalyptus forest in Brazil. Turns out that, they're planting all these eucalyptus trees, which are really water intensive to grow, so the roots soak up all the water, and the people who live there have to go farther and farther to get water, and it's really impacting their crops, it's impacting their livelihood. So we need to pay attention to those things. Attention must be paid. Then, some of these options that we're looking at also have co-benefits that we should consider in incentivizing them. For example, Judy Kincaid talked about weatherization. Weatherization has the benefit of both, creating efficiency, and so you emit fewer greenhouse gases, but also creates a much better living environment for the people who are in the spaces that are being weatherized. I work with a group of students at UNC who a year ago worked with the town of Chapel Hill and Carrboro to weatherize low-income housing, and we sort of looked at the fact that we should bring everybody from the community into a project that would bring home the idea of what they can do to reduce greenhouse gases at a local personal level, and also see the connection between their living space and their world living space. And so we got the town to kind of sign on for that. And then finally, there are examples with high efficiency cook stoves used throughout the developing world, where you have a cooking source that is reducing greenhouse gases, but also reducing indoor air pollution, which has a huge impact on people in vulnerable populations. So I guess I just wanted to sort of on a global level talk about this tension between, okay, we don't want the perfect to be the enemy of the good. We have to do something, but yet we have to step back and think about ways to include vulnerable populations in the discussions, in the policy formation, to make sure that we do it right. Thanks.
Very punctual. That was way ahead of schedule. So we're in good shape. Come on, Savi, if you wouldn't mind, step on up.
Women power, that's why we get it right all the time.
Every time.
Yeah. Okay, well, I kind of feel that I'm sort of in the position of the knitter. And so while I'm going to try to have some degree of discipline and talk about what I have to say, I really feel like it's more in a weaving, or I guess in using your generational term, the remix of it all. The NGO that I work for has been founded for close to 30 years by visionary lawyers, African-American lawyers, who were basically one generation removed from being farmers. And they founded the Land Loss Prevention Project, and that is the North Carolina Association of Black Lawyers, back in the 80s when the country was experiencing critical economic crisis and the farming economy was at its worst. And so African-American farmers in the Black Belt of North Carolina were being driven out and were disproportionately impacted by the farm economy crisis. So they founded this NGO at North Carolina Central School of Law to stem African-American land loss, as well as to do something with rural economic development and sustainability. And since then, we do our work across the state representing all socially disadvantaged, limited resource farmers and rural communities impacted by environmental justice issues. So that's kind of where I worked at. And I think, fittingly, this conference is really carrying on the fine tradition of the discourse here in North Carolina around environmental justice, sustainability, the green economy. And that is because so much has happened in the state amongst the rise of the NGO robust sector that has kept these discourses at pitch level to kind of keep politicians and industry honest about the kind of work they do and the kind of society that we want to live in. Land loss, really, because we work with farmers, most of my comments is around the farm economy. And I just want to say North Carolina leads the southern region in terms of the engagement in sustainable agriculture, organic agriculture. Here in North Carolina, you have coalitions of groups working in sustainable agriculture. And in fact, a newly created Sustainable Local Food Advisory Council, an act of the legislature, is now into its second year. And so we have been trying to figure out what are the alternatives to the traditional agriculture of the state. And I think that the community of NGOs have been at this forefront, have done a very credible job. We see a lot of farmers market. We see a lot of even chefs engage in with farmers, and we eat better. And I dare say Duke stands out as one of the best places to eat in the triangle in terms of where you live, work, and play. In terms of the commitment of the university food system to sourcing local foods and using it very creatively. So in terms of North Carolina's role in this it's still emerging, new green agriculture economy, I think we can claim credit, particularly in the South, for kind of leading the march forward. Well, in terms of, everyone knows, agriculture has a crushing energy footprint. It's huge, particularly traditional agriculture. And so in the rush to meet the footprint of this agricultural economy, the larger agricultural economy in the South, we're seeing, of course, as early speakers have pointed to, fracking and other kinds of needs to get at energy. We're seeing the possibility, God forbid, really, of seeing a uranium mining, uranium to power nuclear power plants and to create all kind of energy on the rise may happen around Coal Hills, Virginia, which is not far from Danville, Virginia, which is down the road from a lot of places that we care about, including Kerr Lake, Lake Gaston. If it were to materialize, would impact Virginia Beach community, would impact even future water systems of Raleigh, which they are about to create expansion of the Neuse River Basin to feed the growing population of Raleigh. So all of that could be impacted by this uranium mining if it were to materialize. As everybody knows, this is a wet climate. Uranium history is centered around the drier part of the United States. Even in this wet climate, we have seen issues, as you know, with hurricanes. We have now earthquakes, so we have tornadoes, so we have much to be concerned about if this were to materialize. So what do we do in terms of moving forward? in response, reorienting our ways to meet the new needs of the 21st century economic development. As our panelists have said, that we need to really be looking more at the green economy and growing the green economy, and as well as to be able to tool the next generation of workers who could take advantage of the green economy. I must say that if we punt back and go back to first base and try to scale up this broken economy that's based on unbridled capitalism through deregulation of not only industries but market and the planet and us, we're doomed to fail. So how do we get to a place where we kind of develop new indexes to measure what this new economy would produce? I think we need to think about innovative ways of measuring like human happiness, human well-being. Maybe if we were to do that, we would get to a place where we can, really figure out what needs to be in place, what the community needs to be happy. And if that's quantifiable, and I do believe happiness is quantifiable, clearly if we did quantify and made it a priority in our health system, we would see much happier people, which would lead to much healthier people. Also, we need to value and restore our natural capital. And of course, that in of itself goes along with the green economy. We need to grow the local. We've seen that it works in terms of the sustainable ag community. We need to really have the infrastructure regionally where we can do the green economy that feeds the region. We have to, of course, get to a place where we have zero waste and a commitment to zero waste. I might add that in terms of even getting to zero waste, we need to get to a place where we not only have a green economy, we also have a living wage, and a living wage that does not have workers. 2 minutes is too not enough time.
We'll give you the extension. Keep on going.
Okay, I'm like, trying to, get it on. All right.
Pull it all together.
And I haven't even sung Marvin Gaye, Mercy Me.
We will make plenty of time for that.
And so, we have to not have workers feeling that the only way in which they can earn a living is to live in suburbia, exurbia. And we need to be able to pay workers so that they can continue to be urbanites and can continue to have good health. So we need to get to a place where I believe at the root of this is to be able to measure human happiness and well-being. As part of my work with the Environmental Justice Advisory Council, I'm not going to go into it, I do encourage each and every one of you to look at the EPA's website and look at the Plan EJ 2014. In 2014, it will be the 20th anniversary of President Clinton's issuance of Executive Order 12898, which established environmental justice in minority populations and low-income populations. It's very important that the EPA is now at a point under its new administrator to put this plan in place. It has some really important built-in pieces that came from the environmental justice movement, and it would be to enshrine and make workable through models environmental justice across the mission area of the EPA, as well as to leap forward across the board at federal agencies. The EPA now heads up the the Intergovernmental Environmental Working Group. That's very critical and important. So please have a look at the EJ, Plan EJ. In conclusion, I just want to urge each and every one of you to get active in looking at the upcoming Farm Bill. It could either be in 2012 or 2013, depending on the political winds. In summary, I just want to charge all of you who are thinking about engaging in civil society, either to work with the NGOs, to legal NGOs, to understand that these organizations play a very critical role in protecting our environment, but using law as a means for social justice. So to me, that is a very brilliant way to begin your career, to get engaged in these systems. I would like to leave you, and this is not Marvin Gaye, but it kind of get us there, with a quote from African American Environmental Thought Foundations by Kimberly Smith. And she says, I quote, "Black Americans have seen the strange rendings of nature wrought by racial oppression. Listen to their voices leads to a deeper understanding of our common task, to redeem and to possess a land cursed by injustice, to make our shared world a more fitting home for human lives." And to take a riff from my sister with her brilliant smile in front of me, who looked up when I said human well-being and happiness, a riff from Mahatma Gandhi, when on India's independence, was asked by a British journalist, welcoming India to the developed world. And he said, but how many worlds will India have to destroy to be developed? So we have a charge is to save the planet. We are really developed. We need to de-develop to get to a place where we can sustainably live. So thank you all. Appreciate it.
How many minutes do we have?
We have to have 30, 20.
20 minutes. Excellent.
Wow,
So we did. Yeah, we did great.
We're efficient. We're gonna save the world.
And we're gonna have mercy me before the end of it all. I forgot to ask you that. Where'd you go to elementary school?
Oh, PS 118 in Queens, in Jamaica, Queens, after being transplanted from Jamaica, New York, and my principal to Jamaica, Queens was from North Carolina, and her name was Miss Pulliam.
Miss Pulliam. All right. PS 118.
That's right.
So I know that based on these wonderful presentations, a lot of us have questions to ask. So I'm going to go ahead and open up the floor for questions. Yeah.
You talked about how you don't expect there to be much leadership at the federal level for the next couple of years. Yeah. As my supervisors at the Nicholas Institute usually say, right now there is real no conventional wisdom about what federal energy policy will be. So how do you, at this current valley right now, how do we try to inject these equity principles that we've been talking about today into the policy formation process?
It's a great question. Yeah, I think it's sort of hard to overstate how bad it is right now in Washington. I hate to say that because it makes it sound, I don't want to be here and be the downer, but it's interesting. I've done a fair amount of work over the last couple of years looking at other countries and how they got in their political processes to an acceptance of global warming, because just about everybody who has moved beyond, who is taking a holistic approach and really trying to scale up, has already had that conversation that we have not had. In fact, we're going backwards on that conversation. And every one of them is either a parliamentary system where their Green Party played a very important role in moving the needle, or is sort of a command and control system like China. So it's a complicated thing to think about how that happens here, given that our Congressional Progressive Caucus, which is still pretty big, there's 50 or so members of Congress who identify strongly as progressive, but they're the left wing of the Democratic Party, and they don't have a voice particularly. And this is a real issue, combined with the fact that clean energy has become a shorthand for a whole bunch of things that are very partisan right now. So Solyndra is shorthand for a whole bunch of very partisan things. But even the word's clean energy now. So I think it's hard, but I'll go back to saying that I think a couple different things. First of all, we've been in bad situations before, and unfortunately, crises sometimes do change the conversation. So the Cuyahoga River being on fire, 3 Mile Island, there are crises that have shifted the conversation in the United States and moved the ball. I hope that's not where we get, but with fracking in particular, it might be. But the other big thing is that actually interestingly, like in China, we are seeing a lot of activity at the local level, and ultimately, especially in the House where things are really backward right now, these guys are elected by pretty small groups of people. They're elected by districts, and to the extent that we can have both activism and community action in those districts and also have businesses have a real strong voice in those districts, that makes the case that this is in fact where the economy is going. And that actually the United States will continue to see factories closed and the middle class shrink if we don't look to the future. I think that's really important. The only last thing I'll say on it as just an example of that is for those who followed the Ohio gubernatorial election in 2010, when Governor Kasich was running, who's now governor, when he was running for governor, he ran in part on a platform to get rid of the state's renewable energy standard. It's not a very strong one, but it exists. And he sort of said, clean energy, that's a socialist issue, and that's crazy, whatever. That's really where we are now with the dialogue, unfortunately. And he got elected, and one of the first meetings he had in office was a group of Toledo businessmen who came in and they said, by the way, Toledo used to be the glass capital of the world and then lost all of its jobs and now is doing really well again only because of solar manufacturing. So you might want to rethink this platform because it's basically helping a section of your state be economically viable for the first time in 25 years. And so he reversed it. He didn't do it. And I think that's a great story to remember because ultimately these guys are responsive to the people who elect them, and ultimately they will listen to the bottom line, and we just need to keep making the case. But I think it's going to have to be a bottom-up case.
I agree.
Any other comments from the panel on that question? You agree?
Yes, we agree.
I concur.
All right.
Okay, I was reading a book from a person by the name Rifkin, Jeremy Rifkin.
Jeremy Rifkin, yeah.
He wrote a book about the third industrial revolution, and one thing that struck me was that he gave a couple of examples of cities that are trying to move towards this green economy. And what struck me was that one was the city of San Antonio. And he speaks of these cases as being isolated cases of municipalities. So the problem that I had with that is that we have hundreds of thousands of municipalities around the country. In my mind, these should be pushed through the federal level, not as a whip and with instructions on what to do, but as moving the municipalities in that direction. Yeah. And I just don't see that happening here. And then another thing, and I wanted to see what you think about it. The other thing is that I have looked online, and there's different organizations with the grassroots that you join, and it are green organizations. And there's the Al Gore one, there's the Green Jobs, there is the 350 or 360. And, it would seem to me that we don't have like a strong push from one place that we can influence policy, because all these organizations are doing their thing in a disjointed way. This is what I perceive. And then the third thing is, do you have any idea why Solandra or this company failed? And my impression is that the solar power, the photovoltaic panels are in the rise. I mean, the market is growing. How in the world a company that is giving $500,000 fails on this industry?
You want to go 3, 2, 1?
Questions, yeah. I'll try to do it fast, and then I want to hear from you guys too.
Yeah.
Solyndra, yes, there is a good reason that it failed, and that is that it was an innovative company that did solar manufacturing that had its entire business model based on the fact that when it started, polysilicon was very expensive in the world market, and so it had a model which used a lot less polysilicon. Therefore, it would be a cheaper technology. That was the whole basis of its business plan. The world market for polysilicon completely changed in the first few years of Solyndra, in part because of forces that I don't totally understand about the technology development, but in part because China just dramatically over-subsidizes its polysilicon market, and so it's able to dump its polysilicon on the market at very, very low prices. So Solyndra was in big part a product of the market. There were other stuff going on there too. The big thing to know about Solyndra is it is a small piece of that overall program. The overall loan guarantee program has a default rate of only about 3%. Most of the loans that were made were to developers with long-term power purchase agreements who had a guaranteed market for their products. So this was an outlier, but that's what happened. So disjointed NGOs, whatever. I mean, yes, we have a lot of NGOs. They do a lot of different things. It's very hard to get them all on the same page because they all do different things.
Is there one that you think is
no, I think they all do different things and they all do different things well. And what happens, it's bad when they actually try to do things that they're not good at. So when deep environmental groups try to become economists, it's probably not a good idea. So I think we should work together. I'm not sure we should all be the same thing.
I've always thought there's a value to different voices.
Yeah, me too.
I do
Yeah.
too.
I mean, it's, the National Rifle Association has the advantage that it's the one gun rights group that everybody looks to. But it's also the disadvantage. It's only one voice, and it's silencing a lot of other thoughts. Within the environmental community, I embrace the fact that we've just got all these different voices. It is frustrating sometimes, but I think it's creative and beautiful. But
well, I would actually point, I mean, California ran a really, really good campaign on the No on 23 campaign to save the AB 32, for all its faults, to save the cap and trade system in California. And the way they did it was to have an overarching message, but then a ton of different groups with different messages that ran their own parts of that campaign. And I think that was really, really smart. And then finally, cities, yeah, it is a lot. I mean, I totally agree. I'm not saying the federal government doesn't have a role. The federal government, we should pass a clean energy standard to get all the states up to the same level. We should absolutely reward the cities that are doing best practices here. The federal government has got to take a leadership role, but I don't see that happening. We're a step back from that right now. We need to get them to want to take a leadership role before that can happen. So that's all I'm saying. But
well, I just think that the last two things that you talked about sort of highlight that tension between, I can't remember, I guess it was, you were saying, Michael, on the first panel that, hey, if we want to see results, you look at the regional level, you look at local community groups, and that's where you have growth and people who can impact on the local level. But then you have, okay, so great, these people are organized and they're getting what they need, but those people aren't because we don't have any federal leadership. So there's just a real tension for that need for an overarching support, and then the reality that, it grows, locally.
yeah.
So whether you're talking about, which public interest group to join, because there's no overarching one that will advocate, there's many different, or whether you're talking about the local governments versus the federal.
Right.
So
I think that's right.
Yeah, I happen to feel that 21st century organizing is very, very local. If you look at where people are most vulnerable is when you have these larger organizations trying to lead the political charge. You don't get that much traction anymore in Congress. You get more traction if you're from a local group, their constituency, but I definitely see the internet as becoming the virtual organizer and community that can kind of give the more global national pressure points. But clearly, in terms of where U.S. politics is, I think it's the very, very local grassroots. Go in and talk to your members. As a matter of fact, on the ag front, you have the head of the Senate Ag, Dflsc. I mean, unless you're from Michigan, you won't even get an appointment to see her. And so even though I know she's willing to listen to the larger concerns and she's aware of them, if you really want her to listen to you, if I want her to do something regarding black farmers, I have to go to a Michigan group, sit down and talk to them and ask them, could you do this? I recall during the summer, there was a piece on the Latino farmers settlement, and there was this congressman who was going to just smash it down. And I picked up the phone and called a Jersey group who is his constituency, and they started a letter writing campaign, and he changed his vote. I mean, that's just how savvy you gotta really work it.
That's right.
I'm going to exercise moderator's privilege to change over to be provocateur, because we're all being pretty moderate here. And the provocateur I want to do is pick up on something you said, which is that happiness is quantifiable. And I know one of the things, I thought that was a really good piece to segue into one of the things that, under the last administration, that talked about the carbon over GDP as the measure. That is, that GDP is the denominator and carbon is the numerator of a fraction, to say that the American economy is already greening because we're producing more in GDP. But one of the things I wondered is GDP really the number, or is there a happiness quotient that we put underneath that carbon? And have you got a number for that happiness quotient?
I don't really know, but I would think more about Human Development Index over a GDP. I clearly would be happier living in Minnesota because it's high amenities, but it's too cold. But they have great food there.
It's a great
Oh my
state.
God, great
Not as great as
state.
Wisconsin.
Right. And so I just, I don't know, I just feel that it's quantifiable. They have done medical studies in which laughter helps with healing. So that's where I get this notion from, that if we're happy, we tend to do things better, our creative juices flow better, we can just imagine the unimaginable in a good way and do things better. I don't really know how to quantify it, but I dare say it is. I just think brain waves would probably, respond to that stimulus.
I was just going to say, Marta Sen and actually Michael Vandenberg have been writing about this and talking about the fact that, more isn't always better. I mean, if you're trying to say, like what is society, what you need to be a developed society, it doesn't mean everybody has to own a car or own a flat screen TV. What does it mean? What does it take to kind of get what you need from your community and live a satisfying life? Because people aren't satisfied with more, really.
Well, it's a really big political issue. I mean, it's interesting because we at CAP are sort of constantly being visited by people who want to talk to us about the American political system. And one thing I've been really struck by the Europeans in particular is, and the Australians too actually, is like we're speaking different languages when we talk about this stuff. I mean, they just cannot get their heads around the fact that we can't talk about global warming in a political conversation. Like they're just like, but what about the social costs? What about and it's part of this American very short-term thinking, very kind of bottom line based, very instant gratification thinking that other countries, I think especially who have gone through just sort of major wars, and China, for instance, I mean, this is China's like 28th rise, right? This is not new. I mean, China is been around for thousands of years doing this.
But they're sure going for the short term.
Oh, they are. But it's actually interesting because you talk to people in China, and especially with the new leadership, they do have a different. I mean, they do have an approach that they think about resource constraints very differently than we do. We think about unlimited resources. We think about the bottom line. We think about. I mean, it's just a completely different conversation. So getting to this, and the positive thing I'll say is that I kind of feel like there's sort of a groundswell of opposition to that thinking. I mean, there's a lot of this local movement to go back to local. This people really rebelling against America, the fact that our worker productivity has gone up so much faster than our wages, and that workers are basically just being screwed, honestly, in America over and over and over again. People are starting to rebel against this.
And that was one of the last parts of our thing, was this the implication of justice in there. Some of it, I'll throw one more provocative thing out, and then we're going to go up to the question in the back there.
Let them eat cake?
No,
That's what we're gonna say.
No, Bucky Fuller wrote this in '68. If you're in a shipwreck and all the boats are gone, a piano top buoyant enough to keep you afloat that comes along makes a fortuitous life preserver. But this is not to say that the best way to design a life preserver is in the form of a piano top. I think that we are clinging to a great many piano tops and accepting yesterday's fortuitous contrivings as constituting the only means for solving a given problem. And he goes on there to talk about the relationship that we have with the Earth's resource base. and how we assume that all the systems that we have in place are the only way of solving the problems that we have. And we have a very great exceptional difficulty in breaking out of that systems thinking in all of our contrivings. So in the very back, we had a question.
So this is for Savi. I'm actually from Minnesota, and I'm from a very small rural town, and so it's all farmers. And I'm just kind of curious, what tools do you give these small farmers to fight big agro-industry? Because, you know, all the farmers that I know, they're selling Pioneer seeds. They go through Cargill, they go through Monsanto. Like, what tools do you give them to be successful to fight that? Because it's pretty tough to fight.
It is, especially if they're stuck in the more traditional agriculture paradigm. There isn't much there. If all you're going to do is grow silage, right? But if they were within the city limits of Minneapolis and you're growing sustainably, organically produced and food, and you could get into the markets there, then that's a different measurement. You do have the program at the USDA level that supports that type of new agriculture. But if all you're doing is growing, it is just the commodity crop type stuff, then you're subject to the market pressure and you're just not going to prosper. Because you can't outgrow Brazil corn or soybean, and for that matter, China with the wheat. So, you know, if you're going to be doing commodities, I really don't see how you can take advantage of the new tools that are available, and just a whole new paradigm shift for healthy food. That food, you can eat food to make you healthy and happier. If all you're going to do is just grow corn and soybeans using GMOs and whoops. I disclaim Duke did not put those words in my mouth. No desperation product placement comment, but I'm just saying, maybe I ought to stop.
Oh, academic freedom, we're going to go right on, yeah. Here and here.
I think one of the main lessons that I'm taking away from today is this discussion of starting sort of bottom-up identification of problems, strategies, solutions, and so. But what I'm thinking about as a consequence of something that I'm seeing with the research on mountaintop removal, which is that there's traction now on anti-mountaintop removal. It might actually move away, but then it's shifting just to the Illinois Basin, where it doesn't have as sexy of a title, and people aren't noticing because they're all giving it. And so. And that happens with other kinds of sort of NIMBY bottom-up problems. And I guess I'm wondering if you have any suggestions of solutions that maintain the integrity of doing something from the bottom up, but then also try and solve that problem of just moving it somewhere else. Is it some kind of interesting networked structure across local organizations? Is it then that require, or is it linking in with federal legislation? I don't know. Any suggestions?
Yeah, I think this, and it goes back to certainly networks of groups are a great idea, and one great thing about the internet is the ability to share best practices and organize in different ways than we used to be able to across communities. But I also think, and this goes to something that you said, and I'm going to just really echo it, that the environmental community needs to think beyond the borders of the traditional environmental community issues, because things like living wage and minimum wage and worker rights, those are the kinds of issues that make it so that there aren't communities left where people have no power and can be steamrollered. So you actually need to be working simultaneously on the environmental issues that are so critical in our long-term sustainability, but also the economic issues that are so critical for long-term sustainability. Getting away from sort of corporate consolidation, getting back to more local movements, and also getting to a place where workers are actually valued again is something that we all have to be part of. And I think part of what we're seeing, there's been real rifts between environment and labor over the Keystone Pipeline, and that's been something we've all been kind of dealing with in DC, and I have deep roots in the labor community, so it's been hard for me to watch and be part of. But Part of what that is, to be honest, is that labor put it all in behind cap and trade. Labor was very, very supportive of getting a cap and trade bill, even though they had to deal with very difficult politics within the unions. The environmental movement was nowhere on Employee Free Choice Act. And those two things, and that was a problem. I mean, that ended up being really starting a rift that I think has really deepened. So we do need to pay attention to that stuff. Like we have to make this about sustainability in a broad sense and fight for sustainability in a broad sense if we actually want to be all in, I think.
Yeah, I mean, it is true, like even the sustainable agriculture community, when we look at the triple bottom line, we're looking at how the food is, the impact of growing the food on the environment. We are looking at social justice. I think some food labels are even better at marketing workers' rights, and you pay the extra penny for an apple that's sustainably produced, that give workers a living wage. At least it tastes better. At least in my mind, and my taste buds would know the difference anyway. But if we do care about what we eat and the environment, then we're willing to pay extra for it. And so I just think now is the time that it's the perfect time to kind of get our act together so we can figure out the pieces and work more deeply at it and care for each other and the well-being of people.
Right, and if we make more money, we'll be willing to pay more for it too. So these things are all related to each other. Right?
Yeah.
Let's, I think we need to be wrapped. One more question? We'll take one more question. Eeny, meeny, miny, mo. Yep, right here.
Well, it's not a question. I just wanted to suggest some resources around the happiness. And there are several indicators. I don't know if you know about them, but Bhutan, the country of Bhutan has a gross happiness index. You can actually access it online. Redefining Progress, which is a Seattle-based U.S. organization.
Do they still exist, actually? I was going to ask that.
I don't know, but they were working on alternatives to the GDP. And then there's a Canadian author who's an ecological economist who wrote a book called The Economics of Happiness, and he's created a genuine wealth model and assessment tool that you can use from the individual to the country level.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for that. Well, will you join me in giving a hand to our panel?
Produced by Duke University, online at duke.edu.